I suppose it was 3 years ago when I first met Kara at a puppet conference in San Francisco, and it was one of her first days in the company, and she was completely excited. And I'm very happy that she kept that being exciting until today. And yeah, I'm also very excited because I may have a talk about Power of Puppet 4, generally about Puppet 4. And within the next 45 minutes, I try to show you what's new in Puppet 4, why you will love Puppet 4. I will show you some stuff, maybe you will say afterwards you don't love Puppet 4, but I hope the first one will be more for you to convince you about Power of Puppet 4. So, I'm from Berlin, Germany. I'm a Puppet Labs partner since, I suppose, 4 years by now. Contributing to some modules on the Module Forge, so contributing on GitHub, not on the Forge directly. When people ask me, what is it that I'm doing? A couple of years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm something like a system administrator, system engineer. Nowadays, I would say, no, I'm no longer a system administrator. I don't like logging into systems via SSH and fixing stuff. When you have to log in via SSH, it's either your monitoring or your deployment is broken. But you don't do that anymore. Nowadays, I would say, okay, I'm more like an infrastructure developer, infrastructure architect. So I try to design what is a platform, how does it look like, and I try to design that platform in Puppet. And I'm very happy. A couple of days ago, April 15th, they made the announcement last year at PuppetConf. They said, maybe we can do a Christmas present by having a release candidate available to Christmas. They didn't make it, but at least now it's there. It's out in the wild. You can install it right now from the repositories from Puppet Labs. There's already a blog article about say hello to Puppet 4. And there's, of course, the Puppet 4 code reference where you can dig into what is new. And this what is new is something that I want to talk about. Many things have changed without the past, well, let's say 12 to 16, 18 months approximately. The first thing was a redesign of the server. The next thing that will come in a later version is also a redesign of the agent. But let's first see what is different on the server by now. The first thing, when you have, by the way, maybe first I should go one step back. Who is already using Puppet in production? Most of the people. All of these people, who's already using the future parser? A couple of them. So I suppose it's 3.6, 3.7 with future parser enabled. Who's using Puppet version 3 without future parser? It's too few people. Who's still using Puppet version 2? Only a couple of them. You will have many work to do. Yeah. I don't ask whether someone uses an earlier version of Puppet 0.25 or stuff like that. So the first thing that will change, when you've seen Puppet so far, maybe you have it running on a mod passenger, in an Apache or Nginx, and Puppet always saw that we have scalability difficulties when we continue running on passenger. We don't want to switch away from Ruby. Instead they said, hey, let's build that on top of a Java virtual machine. Now people might think, oh my God, Puppet goes Java. No, that's not completely true. So yeah, but they're running on JVM. Yes. Do you already have PuppetDB in place? This is an application that is already running JVM, written in Clojure. So what they did was they used the same technology they built for PuppetDB, using it for the new Puppet server. So it's a Clojure application running on top of JRuby. So we're still inside Ruby, but we're running it on top of a JVM. They built something they call Trapper Keeper, which allows you to easily switch on and off certain functionality. You don't need a CA server anywhere on all your Puppet masters. You might need one only. So just disable the CA server on the systems that just do catalog, compile, or file serving. You don't need the CA server over there. The next thing, you get a little bit more metrics. First, of course, there's the JMX console, where you can access and ask JVM, okay, what is about heap and memory and consumption? And within Puppet Enterprise, there's also something called internal metrics. You get an insight into what is happening inside of the Puppet master. On the agent side, it's still the Ruby application. No big changes there, at least not from an outside point of view. But one thing will change in Puppet 4. They will build all-in-one packages. That's this AIO acronym, all-in-one packages. What does that mean? That means the agent installs similar to the Puppet Enterprise agents. So bring its own Ruby version. So you don't need to rely on having a proper Ruby version on the operating system installed via yum or apt or whatever repository you have. It's all bundled by now. And since Puppet says, oh, we have very, very big changes in Puppet 4, they provided new package names. So you don't get that update automatically by just fetching the latest stuff from Puppet. It's a new repository update, so yeah. Many things change, so you have to work manually on getting Puppet 4. Let's dig into Puppet and see what has been done different over the past few years from the server perspective. The first thing is environments. Everybody knows about the static environments. Writing in PuppetConf, and yeah, you have the production environment, you have the test environment, all as sections within the PuppetConf file. And now a developer shows up and says, we need something like pre-testing, something like integration, we need something like a staging test environment. So every time a system administrator had to edit this file manually and adding a new environment. Doing stuff manually, boring. So the first thing administrators afterwards said, hey, just add a path over there and we read that dynamically. Dynamically in the PuppetConf, we just say, hey, the node says which environment would you like to be in, and we just use that variable, and so I don't, as a system administrator, which I'm no longer, as a system administrator, don't have to edit that Puppet file anymore, PuppetConf anymore. Yeah, but then people started, but I want to have in that environment stuff a little bit different. I said, okay, no, this is not possible. We have a configuration which is valid for all environments on this Puppet master. We cannot change that stuff. So the next thing which came up was directory-based environments. That you give just an environment path. Within this environment path, you can have an environment.conf file where you can provide additional information that are related to that specific environment only. Maybe, for example, you want to provide a specific config version. The developer wants to know whether the last commit has been pushed into that repository, so you can compare with the Git server. And of course, they say, Puppet says, the new way of getting environments into place is R10K. Who has already heard of R10K? Oh, a large number, nice, but not all. So R10K, the author said he's very bad at namings. He's good at code, but bad at namings. I can't argue for the first one, but at least the second one he's true, yes. So when he thought about, okay, this has to have a name now, he was thinking about an IRC bot many years ago. He said there was a bot with the name Robot 9000. He said, okay, I just used that name and I'm adding 1000, so it's Robot 10,000. 10,000 is far too much to write, so he said this is the application has the name R10K. This is the reason for the name of that application. Everything you do within R10K is based on Git, so on developer standards. You're working with branches. Every branch in your Git repository, in your R10K Git repository, will become an environment on a Puppet master. Within this branch, you will have a Puppet file. The Puppet file describes which modules in which versions should be available inside that specific environment. So you can easily stage environments, stage a code, module code, for example, say, okay, I always want to have the head in development and I want to have the stable tag in production. Besides this, new language features. This is why people are so exaggerated. What is it that Puppet 4 is bringing? There's new stuff inside. What's it? First, lambdas. Okay, what's that? A lambda is a code block that has parameters and where you can use functions on it. Which first is, why would I need a lambda? You would need a lambda based on functions. So the next thing is combining lambdas and functions. You now have inside Puppet, you don't have to dig into the Ruby, jump out into the Ruby world, doing some stuff with data. You can iterate over arrays directly in your Puppet manifests. You don't have to do that in templates anymore. You just can also do that in your DSL. You can map, filter, reduce, slice. This is only a short list. There are many, many more available built into Puppet. You have two possibilities of using these new functions. The first way is the standard way, like we always used functions. So there is something, I don't know what it is, then there is a round bracket, something inside, or maybe not, and a closing bracket, and then you immediately know, okay, this is a function. With Puppet 4, you have an additional way of using functions. It's in the Ruby native way. So you just say, this is the argument, the variable, and I'm just using a dot and giving the function name afterwards. So for example, I have a variable, it's an array, and I can use the each function on that variable and iterate over the elements of that array. Which means I have to know that this variable is an array. The next thing is the EPP engine. Embedded Puppet would be the best translation for it. So nowadays we only have the ERB engine, which is the Ruby template engine. And Puppet built a new one, because people were completely confused that they have a $sign in front of variables in the Puppet DSL code. And they have to put an add or a scope function or scope lookup var function into their templates. So I said, why can't we do it the same way we do it in the manifests, also in the templates? So Puppet said, okay, we build a template engine by ourselves, where you can still use the variables in the same pattern in the same way like you use them in your Puppet DSL code. The next thing, multi-line was always ugly in Puppet DSL, always. Having something like a content split in for a file split over 3 or 4 lines. So people started saying, no, this looks ugly, make it a template. Nowadays you have the HereDoc support. And the HereDoc support is mostly similar to shell HereDoc. So you can just say the variable gets a content until that specific marker. And you can also say, okay, the content starts at a pipe sign or not at a pipe sign, just starting from the beginning of the line. You can have the same patterns like in ERB, the minus sign prevents a line break. You can have variable substitution by putting your marker into double quotes. And you can use also escape character sequences. Defaults do not escape character sequences, but you can enable them, at least a couple of them. With Puppet 4, something new is also there. It's called the data bindings. You can compare it to getting a new hierarchy. So not related to Hira, it's inside Puppet itself. They say, okay, we have global data. Global data are put into Hira. We have data which we put into our environment, and we have data which we put in our modules. The last one is very, very interesting for module developers, because they now say, how did module developers work? They say, okay, my module is working on Red Hat Enterprise. It's only working on Red Hat Enterprise. And you see, as someone who wants to make use of that module, oh, it's only available for Red Hat Enterprise, but I'm running Debian here on my system, so I need to modify the params PP to add all the Debian specific values. Now, a developer says, I'm putting my Red Hat data into my module. And you, using that module, put your Debian data into your environment or into your Hira data. Either way you like. So in your environment conf, you have to say, I want to have a data provider. Within your environment, you're just putting your data.rb file, where you say, okay, these are the data that I will look up. And inside Puppet, you can either say, I'm doing automatic data bindings, which will do an automatic lookup into Hira, or in this case, do a lookup into your environment data. Data in modules is somehow a little bit more complicated. You need one more file. You need the data bindings file, and you need your function to look up the data. And once more, if you have data in Hira, it will use the data you have in Hira by using the automatic data bindings. So this is done like a data overriding. You have data in modules, And now you want to say, I don't want to like that data in modules. I want to use them in my environment, because in the module it's only Red Hat configuration. And in my environment, I specify this is the way where Debian will have its configuration file, the package name, the service name. And most people say, oh, this is now all the interesting stuff. Having functions available, no need to jump out into the Ruby world, where say, yes, this is interesting, but there's one thing far more interesting. Puppet 4 is now a fully typed system. That means every variable. In the older version, it was always everything is a string. And you have to work on that string. Okay, sometimes you have an array, yes. Sometimes you have an hash. But you had no differences. You couldn't make differences between, is this an array or an hash? You couldn't define that when defining your variable. You had afterwards to verify whether something is a bool or a hash or an array. And now Puppet is a fully typed system. What does that mean? Within your company, you say, okay, we don't like any of these SSH modules around, they don't fit our needs, we have done our own SSH module, which configures SSH. And one day someone shows up at your desk and says, you're the author of the SSH module, we need a flag, because we have some systems where we would not like to have the server running. We only would like to have the client over there, but these systems may not have, from security told us so, may not have an SSH daemon running. So you say, okay, let's think how we can do it. Oh, let's build a parameterized class. Let's add a variable, $server, check it that it's a bool value, make it a default for true, so I don't have to change all my declarations for my classes. But can tell my colleague, okay, just use it now and provide the proper data, and we won't install you the SSH daemon. Yeah, and your colleague makes use of that one. But yeah, he doesn't know the difference between a bool and a string. So he provided a string with the content false. Your code verifies if server says, yes, there's a string inside, so this is true, and he has the server installed. So your colleague shows up on your desk and says, you haven't done anything, it still installs the server. I can provide now a variable, yes, but an attribute, but it's still not working. And you look at the code and says, yes, you're doing it wrong. No, I didn't get a complaint about that I'm doing it wrong. Okay, I will build it for you that you will get a complaint. So you're digging through the std library, standard library, and check for the validate functions. So you say, okay, prior I'm using that variable, checking for it, I will first validate whether that variable is a bool. Now your user still again puts code inside, sees, okay, this is a string. Yeah, okay, at least he gets an error message. But when you do that with many, many data, so this is an easy example where you say, yes, I'm fine, now I can check for proper data. Somehow one of your colleagues comes up with the idea, let's put our users into Hira. So build a big Hira hash map, so we have all users in one place, and we will use them via create resources function or via data lookups. Yeah, and somehow, what is it that is all wrong here? The user ban, the home directory, the home key doesn't have the quotes. Manage home has quotes, but should be a bool. The group ID of Tim it's a digit, but not a string anymore, but we expect it to be a string. The home directory of Tim has missing the deleting slash, so many errors, which you, first, when you see all that data, you won't find that error immediately. And maybe someone else, HR, is providing these data to you. So that is the reason why you definitely need types. You want to check in your Puppet code whether the data that are get provided, either by an explicit call, that you say, I have the class called with certain attributes, or via automatic data lookup from Hira, you want to ensure that your data are in the same way like you expect them, because afterwards you're dealing with data. You want to do loop over an array, but what about when it's not an array? So you have to check for errors. So now your colleague again uses the SSH class. He is providing still a string, and you get the error message, oh no. You have done expected parameter server of class SSH to have the type Boolean, and I got a string over here. So he immediately knows where to look for the data. Nice story, my actual project. They're working heavily with Hira, And they have a hierarchy that comes from development, and the ops guys, they have somehow their secure data Hira environment. And they forgot to adopt a change into their secure data hierarchy. And afterwards, they were digging 3.5 or 4 hours for what is this weird Puppet error nil class coming from, until we recognized, oh, the developers changed the code in the development state. They now want to have an array, but you still have a string into your secure Hira data. You need to modify that too. So if we would have had the typed system already, we would have immediately seen this is not an array. This is where I have to dig for the error. Would have taken us 4 hours less of time to fix this trouble. So that is the reason why you definitely want types. You can build complex data types together. This is only a simple system. You can have optional data types. You have combined data types. You have the integers, float, enum, pattern, regex, boolean, array, and this is not the complete list. This is only a short summary of it. You can even say it's an integer which has a value between -5 to +5. So it is in that range, you still get an error. But of course, with all the power, great power comes great responsibility. Yes, there are things where Puppet said, we've done something, we didn't know how to do it better in the past, so we did it in a certain way. And we learned by all our users, by doing it by ourselves, that the old idea was wrong. And so until Puppet 3, they said, okay, let's keep it still there in place and make it still working. Maybe we get a deprecation message. Everybody's reading log files for deprecation messages, yes. Okay, most people read the log files. Okay, some people will read the log files for deprecation messages. At least one is looking for it. Who's using inheritance? Inheritance on nodes. Node inheritance will disappear in Puppet 4. It will no longer work. Inheritance, they learned by the hard way, is something, developers like it because they can take a library and they say, I inherit all the features from that library and I'm adding 2 more features to it. So they really like it, yeah. But from our perspective, we have troubles because we're dealing with data inside all these inherited classes. So where is the namespace now? Is it the original namespace? Is it the new namespace? I'm really getting into troubles. So Puppet Lab says we still have inheritance in classes because we still want to have the params pattern, so the main class inheriting from the params class. But for the node inheritance, this was utterly wrong doing that in the first place, and we don't do node inheritance anymore. So everybody who has code like that in his site PP or somewhere in his yet imported manifests, you need to clean up your code. So people ask, yes, but it was such a nice way having a base node where we do all the security stuff inside and the base configuration. And yes, you still can do that. Yeah, but how? Use roles and profiles. Follow the pattern, follow the style that Puppet offers you with the modules, and continue doing so also with the node classification, at least the node declaration in the first place. So you're building, again, classes which are your roles and profiles, where you say, okay, I have a class which is my base node class, and I'm putting all the stuff in there, and afterwards I'm including that base class in another class, and that class gets afterwards added to a node. So I don't need the node inheritance I don't need the inheritance on the node basis anymore. And by the way, putting variables into site PP or into nodes is also something you should not continue doing. Another thing, it's such a small, easy sentence, and it has a huge impact. Empty string comparison changes. In Puppet 3, when you have an empty string, that empty string validates to false, which is wrong. An empty string is something. It says something. It says nil, and it doesn't say nil. Nil would be false, which is fine, but it's an empty string. It's a valid expression, so it has to change. So it nowadays validates to true. So when you do code like, I'm checking whether a variable is existing and empty, this will no longer work with Puppet 4. When you now have an empty variable, this code block will validate to true. When I first showed that a couple of months ago, some of the module developers were in London, and afterwards they did a Twitter posting where they said, "Oh my God, this will break 80% of the modules on the module forge." Yes, unluckily that's true, but at least from a pure logical sense, this new way definitely makes sense and is the right way to do it. So if you do data validation, variable validation like that way, just add that the code should not, the variable should not contain an empty string, and then you're already done. The next thing is variable naming. Variable naming will change. A variable may not start with a capital letter. Until now you could, of course, when you see developers and they see the Puppet code, they say, yeah, but I learned that constants are written in capital letters. And when I see this Puppet code from my node perspective, this variable will never change. I cannot overwrite that variable again. I can only set it once, so it's a constant. Yes, you're right when you see it from your one specific node only, but this code is used by many nodes, so it changes, so it is a variable. And using in Puppet something with a capital letter in the beginning has a specific meaning for Puppet. It means, oh, there is an expression, I have to validate it. So now we have a variable. I would like to, what is it? The variable has the name server with a capital S. I have to validate the expression server. What is that you expect would happen? We don't know. So no more capital letters, at least starting capital letters in variable names. Not starting with an underscore. I know that some people did it that way, that they say, okay, we check for a variable and afterwards we add a certain pattern to have the full name, the real name, and then we have the variable underscore real name. Well, yeah, yes, no, you still can do it, but please keep in mind that there is an automatic conversion done. The underscore means that this variable is private to that specific class only where you declare the variable. You can't access that variable outside of its scope. So if you want to access variable from outside, don't use an underscore at the first letter. References. Everybody builds references because you want to have classes ordered in a certain way, you want to have resource types done in a specific order, so you have to use references. What is no longer working is having the reference with a capital letter. As I mentioned, the capital letter is something very specific. It's an expression that needs to get validated. And please stop doing white empty spaces between the type reference and the title you are referring to. So the first example says, this is a reference on a class, and Puppet says, oh, I'm going to evaluate something. What is it that I have to evaluate? I have to evaluate class. Okay, because there's a white space. Then there's a bracket. We say, okay, there's something inside, let's dig inside. Inside you see the reference on SSH. So it says now, this is not the reference, I need to validate SSH. I put that into the bracket, and afterwards I have just two valid or invalid expressions. Nothing which really makes sense. So the first thing, don't provide capital letters on titles, use the small letter titles. And please don't use the white space between the reference of the resource type and the title. Hyphens in names. Who uses modules that have hyphens, so the minus sign in its name? Is someone from Camp to Camp around here? No? No. You're no longer allowed to use the minus sign, the hyphen, in modules, classes, or defines. So everything which you can find on the file system. You have the module part, no minus sign in the module part. You have your classes and manifests, no minus sign in these files. And you have your defines, no minus signs in the name of the defines, not in the file names. So that was the reason why I was asking for Camp to Camp. they provide a nice module, syslog -ng. And this will continue, it will no longer work with Puppet 4. You may use an underscore instead, but no minus sign. The reason is related to the Forge modules. The minus is a separator between the username and the module name. That is the basic reason why you no longer are allowed to use minus signs in modules, classes, and defines. Has anybody ever written Puppet code in Ruby DSL? So something like that start with host class, name of the class, do, and then there's some Ruby stuff, and then there's an end. Luckily not. It has always been deprecated. It was possible until Puppet 3. In Puppet 4, they have removed that piece of code because they said, we can't test it. You're outside the scope of Puppet. You're now dealing natively with Ruby. How should we ensure that you're now dealing with Puppet in a proper way when you're out of the scope of Puppet and you're into the scope of the Ruby world? So they said, okay, we don't need it anymore. We can iterate over arrays. We can split hashes. We can work with data types now, so we don't need that Ruby scope anymore. This was the basic reason why people started writing modules and classes within Ruby instead of in Puppet DSL. So yeah, but now we have that built into Puppet, so there's no need now for the Ruby anymore. And as you see, the mailing list mentioned on January 26, 2013, that's more than 2 years ago, that they said, this is ridiculous, let's stop doing that stuff. And there's still more deprecations. Some of you might be interesting for you, some of you said, okay, but we have got used to it, we still continue doing so. The relative namespace of class names, they got rid of that. So when you have a class, let's say it's SSH secure, SSH : secure, and you have a secure module, and you want to ensure that the secure module is included in your SSH secure class, you will have put 2 colons in front of the secure, because otherwise it would have found his own class SSH secure. So this is the relative namespacing of classes. This is now gone, you don't need that anymore. Personally, I have to say I got used to it. I like these double colons because I immediately see, okay, it's another module, I have to look over there for something is breaking inside. Who's still using import? Either no one knows or no one does. No one does would be interesting, or would be great. What people did for quite some time in the manifest directory where they have their node specification, node classification, they said, okay, we have 160 nodes around here. We can of course put them all in our site PP, but how long will that site PP become? This is not manageable for us. Instead, they said, let's do a subdirectory where we do the database servers in one directory, where we do the web servers in another directory, and in our site PP, we are importing */star.pp. So we import everything which is there. Since Puppet 3, you don't have to do that anymore, because Puppet 3 will look in alphabetic order into first site PP, and then everything else in alphabetic order in all files and directories which will find it in manifest directory. So there's no need for doing the node classification via import. So importing is gone, deprecated anyway since 3.0, I suppose. You could do some other stuff like matching numbers with functions. You could do stuff like a search function. You could search for a resource type, whether it was available or not. They removed that. And you could mutate arrays and hashes. Now they have data types. You cannot mutate arrays and hashes anymore because they are of different data type. So, which will bring us to a summary. The 4 powers, I like to say it, the 4 powers of Puppet 4. The first thing is performance. The Java server, the Java-based Puppet server, this picture is taken from the Puppet Labs website. They have a nice blog post when they first introduced the JVM-based Puppet server. They did some analytics and they said, okay, we have a dramatic increase in performance. When running on Apache or Nginx Passenger, one Puppet Master can deal with 600 to 1,000 nodes, depending on the complexity of your modules. Nowadays, with the new Puppet server, you can even increase this number, which also means you don't have the need of spinning up a secondary Puppet Master and load balancing it so early. Even if you have to do so, you have the scalability via the Trapper Keeper, because you can easily, via one configuration file, switch on and off certain functionality on the Puppet Master. You can build a Puppet Master farm where they say, these Puppet Masters are only do file serving. These Puppet Masters over there, they only compile catalogs. This Puppet Master over there, this is my certificate authority. You can separate the functionality amongst multiple systems, and you immediately know which functionality is switched on and which one is switched off. You have the measurability, so the insight, what is happening inside the Puppet Master. How long do I have a function that uses a huge amount of time to get executed properly? Maybe it's something, a function that goes to a third-party system, and the third-party system has performance issues and doesn't respond properly to your function call. Or you just did it the wrong way by putting too much sleeps inside because it was easier for debugging it, but it still, well, did it into production. You see values regarding file serving, amount of nodes that request. These graphs, like they are in this way, are only available in the Puppet Enterprise version, and these metrics will never make it to the open source version. So it's one of the Puppet applications which are built for the enterprise version only. But I have to say, I really like that graph. And you have the flexibility now in both enterprise and open source, where you say, I now have types. I know exactly, I can describe in my Puppet code what data type do I expect my users to send over. So we're now reaching an approach where we more think like developers. When a developer builds a library, an API, he says, I'm expecting data in a certain type. And I send them over to another system in a specific type. In between, I may modify the type and I modify data according to the need, what is it that I'm doing here. We hadn't had that in Puppet so far. Now we have that possibility. Yeah, when people still are not shocked by all the deprecations and by things that are breaking, and even willing to, yes, let's try this new stuff. I want to use the types, I want to use the functions in Puppet, I want to have metrics, I want to have the Java-based server, I want to be on the leading edge. Puppet 4 is out, you can install it, no longer need to build it manually. Well, first thing, it breaks old best practices heavily. So just putting up a new Puppet server, putting your existing code base on it, I suspect on 80% of the installations, your existing code will fail on Puppet 4. That means, please read the documentation carefully. Read it twice. Do you do tests? Do you do RSpec? Do you do Beaker? Think about it. Think about doing acceptance tests, integration tests, unit tests. I should have started with the unit tests first, of course. Start the unit test, build integration test, build acceptance test, build integration test. Test your code prior you put it into on your new master. You should do that anyway, testing code by putting it, and even in a development production system. So developers would like to work. So from me as an infrastructure developer, I have to ensure that the development system is always working, because developers are working with that system. So it's still a productive system. There has been a discussion on the mailing list. What would be the best way installing a new Puppet Master? Should we upgrade the existing one and migrate all the nodes? And the guys from Puppet said, for the moment, we would suggest to install a new Puppet Master. How long? Who has an existing Puppet installation running for 4 years or more? One. Who has an existing running installation for 3 years or more? So the rest still has 2 or 3 years time. You might deal a little bit earlier with the CA being no longer valid, because at a standard installation, the certificate authority has a validity for 5 years. So maybe it's even time working on your Puppet infrastructure anyway. So building up a new Puppet master might be the best way of doing two things in one. Might be ideal. When you test Puppet 4, and you just have it there for pure testing purpose, it's out there in the lab over there, and we just do some tests with it, and we're checking some modules. Please do all the module developers a favor. File bug reports. Module developers are rethinking their way, okay, how can we deal with that situation? We might want to provide new functionality in new modules, but we still have a large customer base running on Puppet 3 versions. So we have to ensure that somehow also the Module Forge has to support this, that you from the Module Forge can download modules, the same module. In one version it's compatible with Puppet 3, in another version it's compatible with Puppet 4 and breaks Puppet 3. So if you see something not be working on a Puppet 4 installation, please file bug reports, send emails, do something, tell about it. There are how many modules are on the Module Forge? I can't remember the number. And there's even a larger number on GitHub not released to the Module Forge. So it's absolutely insane. And you have to cooperate when working on Puppet 4. And at least the least thing you can do is just file a bug report. Or fix it. That would be even better. So this information that I'm providing here is not something where I try it myself with the latest Puppet version and see whether stuff is breaking or not. I tested it, whether it is breaking, yes, but I found all the description mostly on Henrik Lindberg's blog, Puppet on the Edge blogspot.com.de, doesn't make any difference, .fr should also work. Henrik is somehow the kind of architect at Puppet Labs, and he describes all the new stuff that is coming in Puppet 4 in a really nice and very, complete way. Then there's of course the Puppet 3.7 deprecation documentation. Now there's the Puppet 4 documentation. And what I removed already is there is a GitHub page belonging to Puppet Labs, to the Puppet Labs group, which has the name specification. So this is the place where they first collect the information, how would we like the new system to work, and so this is also a place where you can get information on what was planned in Puppet 4 and what is planned for later versions of Puppet. So there was stuff inside like having the possibility of making variables and classes private. So one cannot use them from externally, allowing module developers to limit the way how you can screw with foreign modules. They just say, okay, this is an API and you can work with it and only use these are your entry points into the module. And all the other stuff that is inside, we encapsulate it, so you cannot use it, but we can do improvements inside. We can do variable renaming inside, because you can't use that variables anyway because they are private. Henrik mentioned maybe 4.1, maybe 4.2, maybe version 5. So let's see, one year from now, let's see whether we have private classes and private variables. I suppose I missed quite a lot of stuff, what is still deprecated and what is still new in Puppet 4, but this was more giving you an overview of the big stuff that is coming. I hope you have enjoyed it.